After our marriage, my husband began to look down on me, chastise me, condescend to my very existence. But what made things worse was that he hid his true nature of his in front of my mother-in-law. One day, we decided to celebrate my husband's promotion. And a big party with all of his colleagues and superiors, along with some family, friends, and relatives, was arranged.
We both know I'm gonna be humiliated if you wear something simple and freaking stupid as you normally do, so you'd better come dressed properly.
On the day of the party, my mother-in-law was so kind as to give me her prized dress. It wasn't anything glamorous at all. From a distance, it just looked like a simple sky blue dress with a flexible skirt. I attended the party wearing this beautiful dress, but as I was trying to catch a gift box from falling onto my husband's head, I accidentally spilled a glass of red wine, and it stained my husband's white suit. "I'm so sorry, honey,"
This is freaking first class!
he shouted as he splashed another glass of wine on me.
You're lucky to finally have a pattern on your plain, ugly dress. Ha ha ha!
He said. Then he turned pale when he saw someone emerge into the room from behind me and told him the truth. This is the story of the real reason behind my husband's marriage to me, and how taking it to the extreme eventually caused his downfall as heir to inherit everything he ever hoped to receive one day. My name is Imelda, and I'm a 35-year-old housewife. It may be a bit strange for me to say this about myself, but I'm a very plain, unrefined woman. And what exactly do I mean by that? I can perhaps sum it all up in 3 points. First and foremost, I have absolutely no sense of style. All of my clothes are rather cheap, patternless pieces of cloth. I personally don't find clothes like that particularly bad, but perhaps society often judges books by their covers, for someone wearing these clothes are acknowledged as plain, uninteresting characters. Secondly, for once, society is right. I'm honestly an uninteresting person. I'm definitely not an outdoorsy person, and even inside, I don't have many hobbies. One that I will admit I take up is baking. And lastly, I have a very quiet, timid personality. I don't speak to anyone unless I'm spoken to, and I never enjoy being the person initiating any conversations with people. I suppose you could say I'm a very good listener and not a good talker. But this seemingly pessimistic impression of me notwithstanding, studying has always been my passion, and I was able to go to a prestigious university. It was at that university that I met my husband, Vitaly. He was the complete opposite of me in terms of, well, everything really. When it came to style, he always looked very flamboyant, driving the same Lamborghini Aventador to and from school. In terms of character, he was very outdoorsy and had lots of hobbies and an active social life. And in terms of society, he was always talking to someone, no matter if it was a good friend of his or someone he'd only met 60 seconds ago. And he was the one who approached me and asked me out. I wondered why he would want to marry me.
No offense to you, truly, but I actually like your lack of pretentiousness. It makes me think you just have something amazing on the inside.
He took good care of me while we were dating. Vitaly is the son of his mother, a powerful president of a major company. And after graduating from college, he himself joined this work for the company as the heir apparent. Anyone would think that someone of that status would try to find someone at least somewhat comparable to him. But instead, he defied all common sense and chose a woman from a very ordinary family. I trusted my husband, who looked after me without seeming to worry much about social status. However, it soon became clear that this was a merely false image of Vitaly. After our marriage, he began to condescend me and chastise me at every opportunity. He began to criticize my appearance, saying things like,
What's with those poor, rotten clothes? Haha.
He even told me the real reason why he married me, even though I had not asked him about it.
I would obviously look a lot more attractive if I had a plain woman without the slightest sense of style standing next to me. Now, wouldn't I? I only chose you as a wife to complement my looks, Imelda. You know, I was struggling so hard to hold back my laughter when I told you I liked you because of your lack of pretentiousness.
I saw him for what he really was. A scumbag who only sought to boost himself up the career ladder. And once I realized how despairing the situation was, I regretted marrying him so much. In a nutshell, my married life was a constant battle against my husband's verbal and moral harassment. He treated me as though I was a tool to relieve his stress. To make matters worse, he was never sarcastic or unbearable in front of my mother-in-law or anyone else from his company. He would put on his mask of innocence when there was someone else around, especially in front of my mother-in-law. He would become so kind to me, it was actually frightening, and at every opportunity, he successfully deceived her into believing he was taking good care of me. Therefore, Mrs. Venuciano seemed to think that we were a loving couple. Here you go, my dears. Here are souvenirs from my last business trip abroad. Please, eat it together, and I hope you enjoy. In this manner, Mrs. Venuciano always took care of us and gave us many presents. It was a huge relief that at least she didn't bully me like her son did. But it was also true that I couldn't talk to her about my husband's attitude because I didn't want her to go home and worry about her. While I loved her for her kindness, my conscience tormented me further because I simply couldn't confide in her and cause her any concern. In the midst of this life of mine, Vitaly was promoted to head of the department. In order to commemorate this auspicious occasion, he was determined to throw a lavish dinner party, so he planned a huge celebration involving his mother-in-law, who was the president of the company, as well as his colleagues and senior and junior staff. A few close family, friends, and relatives were to be invited too.
We both know I'm going to be humiliated if you wear something simple and freaking stupid as you normally do, so you'd better come dressed properly. I'm telling you, the party is going to be a big deal, and there are going to be a lot of people involved. Pray you don't disappoint me, Imelda, or you'll regret ever coming to work for Mama's company.
That's what my husband told me, threateningly. What he meant by dress properly, I guess he meant he wanted me to wear clothes made of top quality and some branded accessories too. I was at a loss because I didn't have any clothes suitable for such a party, but I decided to go with the only thing at home that could perhaps be of slightly better quality, which was merely a formal black dress with a flower-like pattern on the right shoulder. Then Vitaly made me do all kinds of preparations for the big day, including arranging the venue.
A stupid housewife like you doesn't have much time on her hands already, right? So it's freaking only natural for her to do all for her husband, who goes to work every day and brings home the bacon, isn't it?
Vitaly just kept on saying that, taking for granted that everything that had anything to do with the party was to be arranged by me. The fact remained, though, it was his own idea for the party, and yet he didn't do any of the preparations. Because of a certain incident at the beginning of our marriage that I'd prefer not to talk about, I had long since lost the motivation to talk back to my husband. So I silently obliged and quickly began preparing for the party, shoving my frustration outside of my mind for the time being. The party was to celebrate Vitaly's promotion started in the evening, but I got up early to get the venue and prepare everything. When I finished getting ready and was about to leave the house at noon, he was still sleeping soundly and snoring loud enough to awaken Rip Van Winkle from his centuries of deep slumber. I swear, I could feel the entire house shudder with how loud he snored sometimes. Good thing I have a habit of putting on wireless headphones with music to drown it out. Anyway, I left the house with a large paper bag containing the aforementioned dress of mine to change into at the venue. When I arrived at the venue, I completed the final formalities to reserve the room and was arranging the tables and chairs when suddenly I received a call on my phone from my mother-in-law, Mrs. Venuciano. Imelda, come to my house now. I was shocked to discover her normally gentle tone of voice nowhere to be found, replaced by a feeling of urgency and perhaps a hint of anger too. I wondered if there was something wrong with the schedule of the day's party. With such cluelessness and anxiety, I immediately headed for Miss Venuciano's house, which was thankfully a mere 5 minutes away on foot. Nervous, I pushed the doorbell, and when she answered, she had her usual smile on her face. I'm sorry for calling you so suddenly. I'm sure you didn't expect me to have such a tone of voice, did you? She invited me into her house with these words. As I entered the spacious living room, she offered me a cup of tea. Thank you very much, Deborah. Then she looked suddenly at me with a mysterious expression on her face and asked, "You prepared for today all by yourself, didn't you?" "What?" I knew it. I'm always working so much that I don't get to see you guys very often. But I'm still Vitali's mother, my dear. And while it may not seem like it, I do know more about my son than people might think. And besides, I'm one of the unfortunate few who heard a few bad rumors about Vitali's attitude at work. My mother-in-law said this pensively and led me into the next room. "What are you bringing me here for, Deborah?" "My dear Imelda, Vitali told you to attend the party dressed properly today, did he not?" Yes, indeed." I was surprised to hear her words, which were right on the money. She continued, "I've been planning on giving you this for quite a while now, and now that the perfect occasion has presented itself, I think now is the best time. This was my favorite dress when I was but a young woman, just starting to get her business on its feet. How I wish I could wear it again. But I suppose excess weight piles upon you as you gain excess years as well. It didn't fit me anymore. But your figure is the splitting image of mine from 25 years ago, dear. And I'm sure it'll fit you perfectly. And I'm sure Vitali won't complain about this one." With these words, Mrs. Venuciano held out a dress. In a word, the dress was phantasmagorical. It seemed like it was everything possibly imaginable put into one conglomerate of cloth. It was of a simple sky blue color, but you could just see a barely noticeable, yet sophisticated pattern of interlacing flowers, such as roses, hydrangeas, and irises. It had the same kind of flower-like pattern on the right shoulder, and the hind side of the skirt donned a sort of large sky blue shawl that maybe fluttered behind the wearer as they walked. At first glance, it looked fairly simple, which made it nice in itself, but upon closer inspection, it was mesmerizing. And it was apparently her most prized possession. "It's a beautiful dress, but I don't have many opportunities to show it off anymore. You will have plenty, and it would be a waste to put it away in storage. But now I see that the dress was made for you, dear, and I would love to see you so beautiful." Saying this, my mother-in-law pulled out some nice hairpins and corsages and other assorted accessories that went with the dress from her drawers, one after another. To my surprise, Mrs. Venuciano seemed to have noticed that her son had been haranguing me behind her back. That's one reason why she suggested I dress up in a respectable outfit, so that I wouldn't be blamed for the day's events. I was surprised at her astute observation, but at the same time, I felt very reassured that she was on my side. As you're well aware by this point, I didn't know much about dresses, and I still don't, but which is such a subtly ingrained in the fabric, along with the flexibility, shininess, and aura it demanded, the dress was probably really expensive. When she said she would give me such a thing, I was at a loss for words. Deborah, darling, I can't accept such a nice thing. I just can't. This is your prized dress. Why would someone like me wear something like this?" Mrs. Venuciano replied to me with a kind smile. "My dear, I know you will take very good care of it, and that's another reason why I wanted to give it to you. Unlike Vitali, you're very responsible, and I think you should think you deserve this dress." Saying that, my mother-in-law began to dress me. "Oh, thank you." Mrs. Venuciano dressed me in the dress with such a skillful, graceful hand. "I haven't worn a dress since my 20th birthday party," I said, and she laughed. "It's not often that I get to wear a dress either. I'm terrible with style, you see." For the first time in my life, I was the one initiating conversation with Mrs. Venuciano. It was as though she'd given me newfound confidence in myself, and that I didn't need to be so unsure about what to say to make myself seem like an interesting person. I was Imelda, and the Imelda who's surrounded by friends is always bright and lively, so I've been told by my friends in university. As we were talking about this and that, I was dressed in no time, accessories and all. Thanks to Mrs. Venuciano, I looked and felt unstoppable. She assured me that her son would definitely have no complaints about this. I thanked her and headed back to the venue. "I'll be there as soon as I change my clothes." she said, and sent me off on ahead. Finally, the celebration for my husband's promotion had begun. He showed up at the reception desk, took one look at me, snickered, and walked into the grand hall. On the inside, I was annoyed, but I held my tongue so as not to ruin the occasion. Eventually, Mrs. Venuciano showed up, and once the VIPs were present, the party began. Surrounded by a sumptuous dinner, wine, and dessert, I felt as though I could forget my husband's usual harassment, just for today. Combined with Mrs. Venuciano's dress, I felt confident in myself in this environment, and I showed it by talking to people of all ages and social statuses. Talking to some esteemed businessmen was quite tiring, honestly, but after some flexible adjusting to each and every individual, each conversation was an experience. Toward the end of the party, the guests from his workplace brought in their congratulatory gifts, one after another. Soon, the table was overflowing with beautifully wrapped boxes. I stood next to my husband and thanked them all, one by one, for the gifts. As the last person was about to place theirs upon the mountain of boxes, the pile tilted towards Vitali. "Honey, look out!" I quickly outstretched my hands to prevent the large box from falling upon my husband's head. Unfortunately, in the process, I accidentally spilled a glass of red wine, and it stained my husband's white suit. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." Vitali was so flustered that he forgot to put his own glass down on the table and went to the waiting room. I hurried after him. When I went into the waiting room, I found him frantically trying to wipe out the wine from his suit. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." I called out to him from behind him, and he turned around with a sharp look of malevolence in his eyes.
You do realize this is a freaking first-class custom-made suit, don't you? The fabric is exquisite. Do you understand what you just did?
I do. I'm so sorry. I'll have it dry cleaned.
That's not the freaking point, bitch.
The next thing I know, I was wiping red wine from out of my eyes. Yes, indeed. Vitali had splashed me with the glass of wine he'd brought with him to the waiting room.
That's your freaking punishment for staining my expensive tailor-made suit. You stupid whore. Well, at least your crappy cheap dress doesn't even come close to getting back at mine.
The stain spread rapidly across Mrs. Venuciano's dress. My husband beheld it and continued.
I couldn't help but laugh when I saw you at the reception desk earlier, Imelda. Wearing a plain, uninspired dress like that really gives you points for blah. I guess that's more or less what suits you now. I'm glad I helped you put a pattern on your plain dress.
I had soiled my mother-in-law's prize dress mere hours after accepting it from her. I was so sorry for this catastrophe that I couldn't say anything at all. Meanwhile, Vitali kept on saying insulting things at me without showing any sign of stopping. This isn't mine. I was so shocked that all I could do was inaudibly mutter these words. I was so sad that everything my mother-in-law had prepared for me had been immediately ruined. Vitali didn't notice my muttering and shoved me to the ground.
Some maggot you are. Just get the frick home. And don't show your face to me until you know your damn place.
That's when it happened. A plain, uninspired dress? Cheap and crappy. I hope you're not talking about my prize dress, Vitali. I turned around to find Mrs. Venuciano coming into the room. She came running to me, whose tears were now running down onto the floor, and started to console me. All I could do was turn my head to the floor and apologize to her again and again, and again and again and again. Mrs. Venuciano told me it was okay and dabbed a wet spot where the wine had spread with a handkerchief. Vitali, who was watching this unfold before his eyes, turned deathly pale as if he had sobered up. The stain won't spread if I do this. I'll ask the stain remover to take care of the rest. She looked at me kindly and turned back to her son with a totally different look in her eyes. So, which cheap, crappy dress are you talking about? This is an expensive dress that I gave to Imelda myself just this morning, and it cost me several $100,000. The fabric and tailoring were all done from square one, first class, just like the kind you love, son. As soon as Mrs. Venuciano mentioned the price, my husband's eyes opened wide. I had assumed that it was expensive from the start, but I was surprised that it was that expensive. She gave Vitaly a cold look and explained the value of the dress. Vitaly had purposefully stained such an expensive dress with red wine.
No, Mama, listen to me. I didn't know it was yours.
He began to make excuses as if he was in a hurry, but the next moment he uttered something unbelievable.
It's your plain frickin' ass that's to blame, Imelda. I don't know if it's really a luxury item or not, but one thing's for sure. You make it look like a dirt cheap ogre's gown.
Yep. For some reason, Vitaly started to take his rage out on me. What? My husband glared at me, and obviously his mother started to lecture him even more. It's because you judge people by their looks, and not by what's inside of themselves like that you don't know what's really good at all. To be honest, I'm embarrassed to see that side in a son of mine. I know you were deceiving me into believing you were being good to Imelda. I've heard all kinds of things about your bad behavior from your friends in my company, Vitaly. They say you're arrogant because you're the president's son. Once I discovered this was the case, I was worried that you might be treating Imelda the same way you treated your coworkers too. And it seems I was right.
No, Mama, please.
You pathetic little baby. You put that problematic pride of yours aside this instant. Vitaly could have never imagined his mother, who was among the sweetest people in town, easily take on a very unforgiving, strict, reprimanding attitude.
Mama, why?
His voice was pitifully tearful. Where did all that previous energy go to, huh? Suck the frick up, you bastard, I thought to myself. At that time, I suddenly felt the presence of someone else and turned around to see the employees who had heard the commotion staring at us through the fully open door of the waiting room and whispering to each other. Regardless of her husband, who was completely defeated, finished him off with a smile. Imelda, my dear, you don't have to do this anymore. If you don't want to be with him any longer, you can leave him. I can't believe that a man like him, who judges people by their titles and not by what's in them, is my son. I felt as though her words had told me everything that I had been feeling all this time. I felt refreshed as I said without a smidge of reluctance, Yes, ma'am. I would like to divorce Vitaly. Then he broke out in a cold sweat and started trembling.
Don't say that. Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm no good without you.
When you say you're no good without me, you mean you need me because you'd be less attractive without me as a tool to complement your appearance?
No, that's not what I meant.
Vitaly seemed to be taken aback by my suddenly aggressive attitude, mostly because up until then, I had been obediently listening to his every order and shit. He looked away from me, then at his mother and exclaimed,
I'm sorry, Mama. Mama, listen to me. I'm so sorry. Mama!
I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I could hear the laughter of the employees.
You saw nothing.
Come on, Imelda, my dear. Let's go. I left the place with Mrs. Venuciano, leaving Vitaly alone with his shame and disgrace. The employees who heard everything were also hurriedly getting ready to leave. In the end, he was left all alone in the grand hall. Later that day, I officially divorced my husband. Thanks to his mother's pressure, I was able to get him to fill out the divorce papers a lot more easily than I envisioned. After that, his behavior at the party became the subject of rumors, and he began to be looked at with the cold shoulder within the company. It's a strange thing, but once a single rumor gets going, it's as though it worked like dominoes. More information about his arrogance spread across the company, and once rumors led to another, there was no way to stop them. Of course, there was no way Mrs. Venuciano would help her son in such a situation, since he did bring it upon himself. And eventually, he had no other choice but to resign because it became too difficult for him to stay. After resigning, he went to a public employment security office to look for a job because he had been working comfortably at the company he had joined through his parents' connections. He had no good skills or achievements, and since he had never even had an interview before, it was difficult for him to find another job. Also, because he was almost completely cut off from his mother, he had become independent for the first time, free from the lifestyle of living on his parents' money. And yet, He had not lost his sense of letting money slip through his fingers and is rapidly running out of money. On the other hand, Mrs. Venuciano had been very generously taking care of me since our divorce. She introduced me to a full-time job, away from the life of a housewife, and even took care of my wine-stained dress, placing it in the very capable hands of a specialized individual in the profession. I took the kimono in my hands and felt so relieved it was as good as new. I am not yet a woman who understands the quality of things like my mother-in-law does, but I will treasure this dress for the rest of my life as a wonderful gift of kindness that ultimately set me on the path to a better future.